So I know the video title is how to watch sports, but what I specifically mean by that more is how to judge or have an opinion when you're watching sports, because that's what most people end up doing, especially those who are very into it. I think this is really important for a number of reasons, but it kind of reflects on your own life and really like how you judge yourself, because you kind of judge yourself similar to the way you judge other people. More specifically, what I'm referring to is kind of this idea that people are defined by their accomplishments, or pro athletes are defined by, what they've done in the past. And a lot of, fans and critics will often use like a quote, it's kind of saying like, that's just who this guy is. If they just happen to be a failure in some certain aspect, maybe, they haven't won a championship, or they can't get some certain skill down that they kind of need, then they'll say like, this is just his identity. This is who he is. And nothing's going to change, and we've seen the evidence in the past that shows this is true.
Martians have the death beam pointed at Earth. You better hit it. I want Iguodala. That's right. And I know what that sounds like. And it's not fair to Steph because so much defensive attention is paid to him. And I'm not saying Steph's not a better shooter. He's a way better shooter.
Iguodala's got ice water in his veins. Iguodala is that type of player.
So obviously there's a lot more that goes into winning in sports than just pure work ethic. There's plenty of factors that are not controllable and luck-based things as well. And I think this is an important thing to pay attention to, because it really feels like luck is extremely minimal when you're watching sports. One way you can look at this is when you see someone do an insane feat or win the championship, it feels like they're in the moment like unstoppable and flawless, when in reality there's a lot more chance behind that. So what we can do with this understanding is look at people who are all-time greats in pro sports and generic failures, and see that they're not always as far apart as they might seem and feel. So for my example of a success story, I wanted to use the Los Angeles Rams, which is a NFL team who won the Super Bowl championship recently. They sold a ton of draft picks in order to have a really good team for a year or two, and it ended up banking off well because, they won the Super Bowl. But a lot of the games in the playoffs that year were very close battles, and they definitely had some good fortune on their side along with a lot of skill. Now, obviously, because they won the championship, people feel that they're a very highly successful organization, and nobody is really questioning any of the decisions that the management made. All right, so for my example as a failure, I'm not just going to use one player, but actually the whole Clippers organization, which is an NBA basketball team. For those who are unfamiliar, the Clippers are very much associated with being a poverty franchise, right? Like that's their identity. Back to what I was saying before about that's just who someone is, that quote. Many people will say, that's just what the Clippers are. They're poverty. They're always going to be poverty. They're horrible, and they don't win. They're not a winning franchise. So connecting that to recent times, they made a very important trade for one of their best rookies for two, at the time, insanely good superstar players. Unfortunately, it did not work out for them. The two superstar players ended up becoming very injured. They didn't win any championships in the time there. And on the other hand, the player they traded ended up winning a championship and becoming most valuable player. So there are many people now who will speculate, looking back, that this is one of the worst trades in NBA history. But logically speaking, it's not really that bad. Looking back on it, we didn't know the potential that rookie had fully. And we also knew that those two players that they acquired were extremely talented. So tying that back to the Clippers' identity as a whole, it obviously feels that, this trade they made is just part of their poverty franchise identity, that they're not ever going to escape this. And it feels very accurate, because that's how things have been. So my question is, in comparing these two teams and how we judge them, is this extreme difference really necessary? The Rams are obviously seen as very successful for winning the championship, and the Clippers are obviously seen as extreme poverty and stupid for making that trade that gave up an MVP player and obviously not winning championships. My answer would obviously be no, and I think that this is a really big problem in the way that people watch and judge sports, as Clippers still are not that bad, even though they haven't won championships, and the Rams got pretty fortunate in a lot of important games to get their Super Bowl. So they're really not as far off as you actually feel that they are. But you might think that Judging these people is not really that important to your own life because they're not in your life and it doesn't really affect you, but it really does affect you mentally, as you're going to judge yourself in a very similar way when you encounter a similar circumstance. And what this similar circumstance is failing when trying your absolute hardest, doing all the right things at really high stakes.